10th, I'm confident in myself. That's what I'm saying. It's not about how he is. I just really like, I've got.
See him in person.
I want that chain.
Okay, what
That
were you?
shit's dancing. That chain is dancing. You know what I mean? I'm like, give me that.
We going to war, baby. This 50 cal's going in your head.
Perhaps the chain on the line.
Jake called me. He called me. He didn't call my team. Jake called me. I said, okay, no problem, no problem.
Easy money.
Not easy money. We'll see. I'll let you fight. I feel good. He's done me a favor. Walking around bulky and heavy. I feel quick. I feel amazing. So I'm looking forward to the fight. That's why I'm just vibing right now.
The world of boxing in late 2025 had become a chessboard where digital influencers, legendary champions, and streaming giants moved their pieces with a single click. When the calendar swung toward December, fans expected a routine heavyweight clash, but the universe had a different script. The fight that finally materialized, Judgment Day, between Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua was not merely a headline, it was a culmination of a cascade of shocks that started with a canceled exhibition and spiraled into a showdown between two very different styles and legacies. The first domino fell with the abrupt collapse of the anticipated Jake Paul vs. Gervonta Tank Davis exhibition. This match, scheduled for November 14th at the Kaseya Center in Miami, had been marketed as a David vs. Goliath spectacle, a 200-pound influencer against a 135-pound lightweight champion. The narrative was simple, even sensational. Could the raw mass of Paul defeat the technical brilliance of Davis? The event was designed as an exhibition to skirt the usual sanctioning complexities that would arise from such a weight disparity. Yet, even in the realm of exhibition bouts, the stakes were high. Broadcasters, promoters, and sponsors were already locked in a profit-driven dance. However, in the weeks leading up to the fight, a legal crisis erupted. In late October, a civil lawsuit was filed in the Miami-Dade County Court by former partner Courtney Russell, accusing Davis of battery, aggravated battery, false imprisonment, kidnapping, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The allegations detailed violent encounters at a strip club and a parking garage, even citing threatening text messages that allegedly said, "Kill me." The lawsuit's specificity struck a chord, turning a sports event into a public relations nightmare. An active police investigation followed, casting Davis into the spotlight for reasons far beyond the ring. For most valuable promotions and its broadcast partner Netflix, the situation demanded immediate action. Netflix, unlike traditional pay-per-view networks, operates under corporate governance that prioritizes brand reputation and viewer trust. The rapid escalation of allegations meant the event could not go on. On November 4th, MVP announced the fight's cancellation, citing responsibility and the necessity to move forward with integrity. The decision left the Kaseya Center's date vacant and sent shockwaves through the undercard fighters who had been counting on the event's paydays. Jake Paul, seizing the moment, fired off a social media tirade, calling Davis a walking human piece of garbage, and publicly apologized to the athletes whose livelihoods were instantly jeopardized. With the main card gone and the venue slot open, MVP's urgency shifted from a simple postponement to an overhaul. The event's date was moved to December 19, still in Miami, and the undercard, featuring champions such as Alicia Baumgardner and MMA legends Anderson Silva and Tyron Woodley, needed a replacement headline of equal or greater magnitude. The search for an opponent that could match or surpass the commercial appeal of Davis led the promoters to a figure who seemed out of place in this new context, Anthony Joshua.
Now, a couple months. Yeah. In the darkness, in secret.
No, it's not a secret.
Are you sparring with Usyk?
No, I don't spar with Usyk.
Okay.
Usyk's, he's training somewhere else at the minute, but he's been in.
Anthony Joshua's selection was a masterstroke of strategic opportunism. Joshua had long been a mainstay in stadium-sized fights across the UK and Saudi Arabia, and his presence at a YouTube-crossed event might have seemed excessive. Yet, the context of late 2025 painted Joshua in a different light. The month before, in September 2024, he suffered a devastating defeat at Wembley Stadium against Daniel Dubois. Dubois' dominance was undeniable. He landed 79 punches to Joshua's 32 with a 40% connect rate versus Joshua's 27%. Multiple knockdowns and a psychological blow left Joshua's career in tatters. Financial considerations also weighed heavily. Joshua's last fight had left him with a sizable payout, but little future guaranteed, especially after a loss that dented his marketability. The prospect of a high-profile fight against a YouTube sensation broadcast on Netflix offered not only immediate financial reward, but also a platform to regain visibility. For Jake Paul, securing a former unified heavyweight champion like Joshua elevated his credibility and broadened the audience beyond his existing fan base. The negotiations that followed were intense. Matchroom Boxing, Joshua's management, saw the opportunity as a chance to re-enter the global spotlight. Meanwhile, MVP's partnership with Netflix was pivotal. The streaming platform's massive subscriber base promised an unprecedented viewership, a fact that could compensate for the potential lack of traditional boxing fans. Both parties understood that Judgment Day would not be a standard match. It would be a narrative collision between two worlds, each with its own expectations and narratives. In the weeks that followed, the event's details were refined to match the expectations of a global audience. The weight stipulations were debated. While Paul had campaigned at cruiserweight limits, 200 pounds, Joshua had a more established heavyweight pedigree. The final arrangement saw both fighters compete at a 200-pound limit, with Joshua cutting down from his typical 210-plus weight, a concession that highlighted the gravity of the match. The fight was set as a 10-round contest, a standard that balanced Joshua's experience and Paul's rising reputation. As December approached, anticipation grew. The narrative was no longer simply a fight. It was a culmination of a chaotic fourth quarter of the 2025 boxing calendar. A legal scandal, a corporate pivot, a championship loss, and a digital influencer's ascent all converged. Judgment Day would test not only the physical mettle of its participants, but also the evolving dynamics of combat sports in an era where streaming giants, social media, and traditional championship legacies intersect. The fight was not just a bout, it was a mirror reflecting the sport's rapid evolution. It showcased how quickly a promotional strategy could shift, how swiftly reputational risks could reshape an entire event, and how fighters had to adapt to a world where a single platform could elevate or destroy a career. On December 19th, as the Kaseya Center's lights dimmed for the final time, the world watched to see who would prevail. The influencer who had redefined the modern fight, or the seasoned champion who had once ruled the ring.
You say an insane challenge. You've described it before as Jake Paul being a cat versus Anthony Joshua's lion. Yeah. I mean, they're not equally.
The outcome would reverberate far beyond the canvas, setting a new precedent for how boxing would navigate its digital future. The undercard itself felt like a microcosm of the larger narrative. Each fight a chapter in a story of reinvention and stakes. The co-main event, a 12-round bout between super featherweight champion Alicia Baumgardner and challenger Layla Baudouin, carried a weight that went beyond the ring. Baumgardner, a vocal advocate for parity in the sport, had long campaigned for women to fight under the same 3-minute rounds that men face. The decision to make it a 12-round contest rather than the customary 10-round 2-minute format was not merely a bout, but a statement. It underscored the idea that knockouts, technical skill, and endurance are universal attributes, regardless of gender. In a world where audiences often conflate a female fighter's legitimacy with her shorter rounds, this match stood as a beacon for equality, leveraging the Netflix platform's massive reach to normalize the standard. The fight was also a cultural moment, a chance to see a female champion who had dominated the featherweight division in a setting that mirrored the men's world, thereby reinforcing that the same rules apply to all who step into the squared circle. Behind the undercard's bright lights, the main event's rules rattled in the background like a distant storm. Jake Paul had built an empire on spectacle, yet this bout had shifted gears into something that could genuinely be counted as professional. 8 rounds, 3 minutes per round, 10-ounce gloves, standard enough to satisfy boxing purists, but still thin enough to keep the match fast-paced. The decision to keep it at 8 rounds was a compromise that reflected both parties' concerns. Paul, with limited experience beyond the cruiserweight limit, had to face a boxer who had grown accustomed to the 12-round endurance of heavyweight titles. An 8-round distance, therefore, felt safer for Paul, who was not yet ready for the grueling 12-round marathon of championship fights. In turn, Joshua, whose training camp had been interrupted by surgery and a loss that left him mentally scarred, was allowed to return to a more manageable format. The rules were a balancing act that tried to keep the match fair while still generating the spectacle fans craved. The weight limit, 245 pounds, was the most controversial clause in the contract. Heavyweights traditionally have no upper limit. They fight anyone above 200 pounds, and many champions routinely exceed 260 pounds. By forcing Joshua to cut 7 or 8 pounds of muscle or water, the deal forced him into a new kind of challenge. While Joshua had previously fought at 240 pounds against the likes of Usyk II and had even weighed 245 pounds against Martin, the psychological pressure of losing mass to meet a contractual limit cannot be underestimated. Eddie Hearn, Joshua's longtime promoter, brushed off concerns, labeling it work to do and not a critical hurdle. Yet behind the bravado, there were murmurs in the locker rooms. Would the weight cut impact Joshua's punch resistance or stamina? Would he feel more vulnerable at the 10-ounce gloves, a scenario that might sway the fight's outcome? Paul, conversely, was expected to bulk up to 225, 230 pounds, a career high from his 200-pound cruiserweight ceiling. The sudden increase carried its own risks: slower movements, heavier breathing, and potential cardiovascular strain, all of which could offset Paul's usual raw power and youthful agility.
When it comes to fight, and by the way, there's no stuff in the contract that says that I can't do this, I'm gonna come to fight,
The weight dynamic was a narrative thread, hinting at a deeper psychological chess match between the fighters and their management teams. On the sidelines, the Saudi influence loomed large. Turan al-Zahari, the Saudi crown prince, had stepped forward as a sponsor, signaling not just financial backing, but a political promise. The king's backing was not a mere sponsorship. It was a strategic alliance that could open doors to future fights, especially in the Gulf and beyond. If Joshua could pull off a win under these unprecedented rules, he would re-establish himself as a viable contender in a market where Saudi investment is poised to reshape the sport. The implication was clear. A victory could lead to a Saudi-endorsed fight that would be both lucrative and prestigious, positioning Joshua at the crossroads of traditional heavyweight ambitions and emerging geopolitical interest in the sport. Jake Paul's evaporation strategy, an approach that likened this fight to a high-stakes gamble, where the challenger could essentially evaporate the risk of a loss, was a narrative that had been building since Paul's early fights. After a loss to Paul in the Tyson vs. Paul showdown, Paul had returned to the ring with a new set of rules that blurred the lines between entertainment and sport. The 8-round, 245-pound limit and the contractual conditions all came together to form a plan that seemed to give Paul the best possible conditions for a dramatic win. His delusional optimism, the belief that he could defeat a champion who had lost an important match and appeared mentally wounded, was an element that colored the audience's perception. For Paul, the fight was a chance to prove that the same platform could elevate a YouTube star to a genuine title contender. For Joshua, it was a chance to regain dignity and perhaps even a stepping stone toward a future where he could fight for a world title again under the full 12-round format. The psychological state of Joshua heading into the fight was a theme that threaded through all the commentary. After suffering a loss to Dubois, where he was defeated in the 6th round, he had been described as mentally wounded. The loss was not only a blow to his record, but also to his confidence. He had struggled to find the rhythm that had defined his previous bouts. In interviews, he spoke of needing to realign his mental focus, to bring back the confidence that had once made him a dominant force. Yet the financial stakes were clear. This fight was his last chance to secure the financial security that came with a victory. Paul had built an evaporation strategy that hinged on a quick turnaround, leveraging the fight's popularity to produce a substantial payout that could offset the losses from his previous bout with Tyson. The partnership with Saudi Arabia also added a layer of urgency. If he lost, not only would his record suffer, but his future opportunities in the heavily funded Saudi-backed markets could be jeopardized. Against this backdrop, the public's reaction to the crazy fight rules that Paul had proposed became a talking point. Paul's willingness to agree to 8 rounds instead of the usual 12, the weight cap, and the insistence on using standard 10-ounce gloves all seemed to signal a serious step toward professional legitimacy. The fan base that had once laughed at Paul's earlier fights, where 2-minute rounds and 14-ounce gloves were the norm, found themselves questioning whether Paul was moving beyond his own entertainment machine into the realm of true sport.
This is my first pro fight, was in Miami against Gibb. I'm bringing that same energy here. First round KO.
And the Schmo interviewed you there?
The rules, which were, in the end, not too radical but still significant, made the match more than a joke. They invited a serious debate. Could a YouTuber's showmanship coexist with the rigorous standards of professional boxing? Was the fight more about Paul's ego or about proving that a former champion like Joshua could still deliver a legitimate, competitive performance? The narrative of the fight extended beyond the main event. The undercard included bouts that highlighted rising stars, veterans, and female fighters demanding equal footing. Each match carried its own stakes. The men's 12-round bouts for the women's featherweight title and a 12-round title defense for Baumgardner against Baudouin, the women's fight that was designed to challenge entrenched norms. The fight cards were carefully curated to appeal to a broad demographic, harnessing the audience that had been displaced by the Davis cancellation. This strategic assembly was not just about filling time. It was about presenting a platform where the message that rules apply to all could be heard loud and clear. In sum, the fight's unusual rules, 8 rounds, 245-pound limit, and full sanctioning, reflected a delicate compromise between spectacle and sport. They underscored the high stakes for both fighters, Paul's attempt to legitimize his brand and Joshua's effort to regain both physical and mental footing. The undercard, especially Baumgardner's historic 12-round contest, served as a larger statement on equality and the universality of boxing's demands. Together, they wove a narrative that was as much about the future of the sport as it was about a single, unlikely bout between a world champion and a YouTube star. The buzz around Judgment Day had been building like a storm, each day bringing another layer of anticipation that made the fight feel less like a scheduled bout and more like a seismic event in the boxing world. When the undercard was announced, the excitement wasn't just about the main event. It was about how the entire card was stitched together to create a narrative that pulled in fans from every corner of combat sports. One of the most talked about undercards was the MMA Legends Tour match between Anderson Silva and Tyron Woodley. Silva, the former UFC middleweight king, had already tasted defeat at Paul's hands in 2022, a decision loss that still hung in the air like a half-forgotten dream. Woodley, the ex-UFC welterweight champion, who had been knocked out twice by Paul, once in a brutal KO and once by a decision, stepped in as the replacement for the original Chris Weidman slot. For the MMA fan base that had been glued to the Davis card, this fight was a nostalgic callback. It promised a high-energy show that counterbalanced the clinical seriousness of the main event, drawing attention to the cross-pollination of boxing and MMA fandoms. In a way, it was a love letter to the era when fighters moved fluidly between disciplines, and it underscored the spectacle that Jake Paul had become. The card also felt fresh because of its focus on emerging talent. Prospects like Obvious Griffin and Keno Marley were added, fulfilling MVP's mandate of developing young fighters while delivering blockbuster attractions. Their inclusion was a nod to the long-term vision that the event was not merely a one-night gimmick, but a platform to shape the future of the sport. By placing these fighters in front of a global audience, the promoters were sending a clear message. The fight was about the present and the future, not just a past glory spectacle.
I'm gonna break his body up. I'm gonna stomp all over him. That's my mentality, right? That's a fighter's mentality. And I know what's in my heart. I know what's in my mind. And I'm here to compete. I'm here.
All of this took place on Netflix, a platform that had recently stumbled with the Tyson broadcast, which suffered from buffering and technical glitches. The stakes for Netflix were high. Judgment Day was a litmus test for the streaming giant's ability to handle live, high-concurrency events. Success here would signal to other rights holders, like the NFL and NBA, that Netflix could be a serious contender for live sports. And beyond technology, the decision to place the fight on a subscription service rather than behind a pay-per-view wall was revolutionary. It broke down traditional economic barriers, allowing fighters like Joshua to reach a demographic that would never pay $80 for a PPV, but would watch as part of their existing subscription. This exposure was a key component of Joshua's realignment strategy, extending his brand beyond the hardcore boxing niche into mainstream entertainment. But how would the fight actually play out? The technical and strategic forecast paints a vivid picture. Joshua's path to victory starts with his jab, a weapon honed by a 6-inch reach advantage. If he can establish that jab early, Paul will be kept at a distance, unable to enter striking range. Joshua's jab is not only stiff but consistently damaging, disrupting rhythm and building cumulative damage. Once distance is established, Joshua will switch to his straight right hand and finish. The analysis suggests that a knockout or technical knockout will likely happen between rounds 3 and 5, as Joshua commits to his finishing punches after dismantling Paul's defenses. On the other hand, Paul's path is built on chaos. He is a disruptor, a fighter who thrives on the element of surprise. He will look to throw the first blow with his heavy right hand, hoping to find a weak spot before Joshua can counter. The glass chin theory, Paul's tendency to absorb early blows and survive the first stanza, provides a temporary buffer, but it is a double-edged sword. If Paul takes a hit, his guard drops, opening the door for Joshua's reach. Stamina also becomes a factor. The 8-round distance and a weight cap of 245 pounds do little to bridge the gap in class between the two-time champion and a novice pro. Paul, at a lighter weight, might find the extra weight of the 245-pound limit draining in the latter rounds, especially if Joshua maintains a high pace. Weight and stamina are intertwined. The 245-pound cap meant Paul would walk into the ring slightly heavier, but the reach and height differences still favor Joshua. Stamina concerns extend beyond weight. An 8-round fight is a different beast compared to Joshua's typical 10 or 12-round championship bouts. It compresses the fight into a shorter, more intense package where the psychological elements become amplified. Joshua's recent trauma against Dubois, a knockout that left him grappling with doubt, and the pressure of being the heavy favorite against an influencer create a volatile mental environment. For someone who has historically struggled against chaotic fighters, this could be a critical equalizer. Paul's heavy right hand and delusional optimism inject the chaos factor that Joshua has often found difficult to contain.